Hello everyone, have a nice evening. Enjoy a good ghost story with light rain sounds from BLACKRIDGE Stories. Sleep well after listening to the story. Welcome to the first dark and tense story, The Ghost on the Bridge. I'm an Uber driver living in Brooklyn. I usually take night shifts, not because I enjoy the silence, but because they pay better. There's less traffic and fewer talkative passengers. But there's one thing I never tell anyone. I always avoid any ride that crosses the Brooklyn Bridge after midnight. Not because I'm superstitious, but because of something that happened one October night, just as the wind started to change. That night, I got a request at nearly 1 a.m. The app showed a blue dot waiting near the Dumbo area. I pulled up, stopping in front of a pedestrian walkway that led up to the bridge. No one was there. I was just about to cancel the trip when the back door opened, without a sound. A young woman in a red coat got in, long black hair. Her face was so pale I briefly thought she was in a Halloween costume. But it was only the 28th, 3 days before Halloween. She didn't say anything, just nodded when I asked for her name. I started driving toward the bridge. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I noticed the first strange thing. She had no reflection, just an empty back seat. I turned to look directly, and she was still there. But only when I looked straight at her. A chill crept down my spine, but I forced myself to stay calm. The ride was silent as we reached the midpoint of the bridge. Suddenly, the headlights flickered for a moment, and the radio turned on by itself, blaring an old jazz track, harsh and jarring. The girl said nothing, but I could feel her watching me through the mirror. A cold breeze seeped into the car, though the windows were rolled up tight. "Do you know how many people have died on this bridge?" Her voice was soft as a whisper, but sharp as ice. I flinched, and before I could answer, she continued. "They never left. They just hitch a ride." I whipped my head around. The back seat was empty. No one there. I slammed on the brakes, and the car came to a halt in the middle of the bridge. When I looked again, she was sitting there, like she had never vanished. "Don't look behind you," she hissed, her voice scraping like metal on glass. "They're coming." I looked into the rearview mirror. This time, I didn't see one person, but dozens. Then hundreds. Figures walking slowly. No faces. No eyes. Just hazy silhouettes like drifting smoke. They crowded behind the car, making no sound. Only the whistle of wind squeezing through the door seams. I slammed the gas pedal. The engine screamed, and the car surged forward toward the far end. But it felt like I wasn't moving. The Brooklyn Bridge seemed to stretch endlessly. The lights on either side began to dim, and the space around me started to collapse inward, leaving only the sound of my pounding heartbeat and the radio, now a blur of chaotic whispers. Each whisper sounded like someone calling my name. "Mark! Mark!" I screamed, yanking the steering wheel wildly. The car skidded into the opposite lane, but didn't hit anything, because there were no other cars. Not a single soul. No sound except my own ragged breath and those haunting voices. When I turned around again, the girl was gone. The Uber app had automatically canceled the ride, leaving no record of the trip. The time was 1:44 a.m. I didn't stop driving until I was out of Manhattan. I pulled over, turned on every light inside the car, and shakily called my girlfriend, but no one answered. The phone screen flashed, no signal. The next day, I told the story to an older driver at a gas station. He didn't look surprised. "The girl in the red coat? You saw her," he mumbled. "She died in 1925. A scaffolding collapse during her wedding photo shoot. They say she hitches a ride every year around the time she died, trying to find her way home, but no one's ever brought her there." I quit night driving after that, but sometimes, when I cross the Brooklyn Bridge during the day, I still catch a flicker of red in the mirror. Have you ever heard footsteps when there's no one around? Part 2. The Ghost of the Manager Never Leaves, Stanley Hotel. Setting: Estes Park, Colorado, Stanley Hotel. I'm a travel photographer and blogger, specializing in places steeped in mystery and rumored to be haunted. While planning a road trip across Colorado, I couldn't pass up the chance to stay at the infamous Stanley Hotel, known not only for its historic architecture, but also as the inspiration for Stephen King's The Shining. I told myself, it's just one night. But one night was all it took to change how I see the world. I arrived on an autumn afternoon. Cold wind whispered through the pines, and the shadows seemed to fall earlier than usual. Stanley had a vintage charm, but there was a chill that clung to the air. I checked into room 217, the one tied to numerous ghost stories. The receptionist only smiled when I joked about seeing ghosts. "If you do," she said gently, "sleep well." As if it were a normal occurrence, my room was clean, with creaky wooden floors that protested every step. I spent the evening photographing the hallways, lined with giant mirrors, vintage chandeliers, and deep red carpets that looked like a scene from an old movie. But when I returned to my room, I noticed the first strange thing. Every photo I took in the hallway was blurry, except one. In that single photo, a man in an old manager's uniform stood at the end of the hallway, staring directly into my lens. I hadn't seen anyone there, not a soul. That night, I couldn't sleep. The old clock ticked endlessly, and the wind seemed to howl through sealed windows. Around 2 a.m., there was a knock on the door. 3 knocks, slow and deliberate. I opened it, no one. The hallway stretched into dim yellow light and silence. I returned to my room. The lights flickered off. When they came back on, my suitcase was wide open. Everything inside had been tossed around, like someone had been searching for something. I know I locked it, and on the pillow was a small slip of paper. "Keep silent at night." The handwriting was old-fashioned, written in what looked like fountain pen ink. Trying to calm myself, I told myself it was probably just a prank. I decided to head to the front desk, but the elevator was acting strange. When the doors finally opened, I stepped inside and immediately noticed no mirror, no lights, and the stench of damp, rotting wood. The elevator didn't stop at the lobby. Instead, it took me to the basement, a floor not shown on any hotel map. The door opened to a narrow corridor lit by wall-mounted oil lamps. I heard footsteps ahead, slow and steady. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" No answer. But when I turned to go back, the elevator was gone. I wandered that maze-like basement until I saw him. A man in an old-fashioned hotel manager's uniform, vest, bow tie, slick back hair. His face was pale, lifeless, his eyes hollow and sunken. He stared at me, unblinking. "This floor is not for guests," he said, his voice deep and echoing like it rose from a deep well. I got lost. I don't know how I ended up here." "There's always a reason people come down here," he replied, "and not everyone makes it back up." I stepped back, my heart pounding. He moved closer. His footsteps made no sound. When he was just a few feet away, I shut my eyes and screamed. When I opened them, I was standing outside my room. No memory of how I got there. The next morning, I checked out without hesitation. I told the story to an older housekeeper. She only nodded. "The old manager died in the basement in 1911, she said. "Boiler explosion. Folks say he never left, still checks the rooms. Late at night." I never published those photos I took at the Stanley Hotel, but sometimes, late at night, I look at them again. And in the last one, taken in that basement hallway, he's still standing there, never moved, year after year. If you ever visit the Stanley Hotel, remember to stay quiet after midnight, because you might wake the manager, and he does not like to be disturbed. Part 3. A Whisper in the Walls, Winchester Castle. Setting: San Jose, California, Winchester Mystery House. I used to think I was immune to fear. As a historian specializing in architecture, I've walked through hundreds of old homes, many rumored to be haunted. But not until I visited the Winchester Mystery House did I truly understand what it feels like to be watched, not by a person, but by something that doesn't belong to this world. The house sits tucked within a quiet San Jose neighborhood. From the outside, it looks like a maze built by madness. Staircases that go nowhere, doors that open into walls, hallways twisting into oblivion. The architecture is irrational, as if designed to mislead something. I came here to write a research article on Sarah Winchester, the widow of the famous rifle magnate, and the strange motivations behind this place. Legend says Sarah believed she was haunted by the spirits of those killed by Winchester rifles, and that she could only keep them at bay by building endlessly. From the moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. Not the typical chill or creaking sounds. It was the sensation that the house was observing me. The tour guide, a cautious-looking middle-aged man, responded oddly when I asked about the doors that lead to nowhere and the staircases spiraling into ceilings. She built them to confuse those who never found peace, he said flatly. I was granted permission to stay one night, to take notes and make observations. That night, I brought a voice recorder and an infrared camera. I chose to set up in Sarah's former seance room, where she believed she communicated with the dead. Around midnight, while checking my equipment, the recorder suddenly powered on, though I hadn't touched it. A faint sound began to play, a woman's voice, barely audible and broken. "They are coming." I immediately replayed the recording, but the voice was gone. Only static remained. I tried to rationalize it, but at 1 a.m., my infrared camera captured a strange figure at the far end of the West Wing hallway. A woman in a black Victorian dress, standing with her back turned. I ran to the spot. No one was there, but the air was freezing, and the floorboards were damp, as if someone had just walked across them. When I returned to my room, I found the door locked from the inside. Then came the footsteps, soft and slow, above me. I was supposed to be alone in the entire house. I called for the night manager. No answer. My phone had no signal. I remembered what the guide had said. Some rooms close themselves at night. People say that's when they return. Suddenly, a nearby door cracked open, one that had been sealed shut. Inside was a narrow room, barely big enough to stand in. On the walls were strange symbols, spirals and geometric patterns, almost like coded glyphs. I took a few photos, but every image turned out black, as if the light had been swallowed. Then the knocking started. Once, then twice, then 3 times, steady, rhythmic. I stepped closer to the wall and pressed my ear to it. I heard whispering, rapid and overlapping, like multiple voices speaking at once, but none I could understand. It sounded more like an ancient curse. I didn't sleep that night. The wind howled through cracks in the window. The lights flickered, and dark shapes moved across the mirrors. Every time I turned to look, nothing. The next morning, I hurried to leave. Before going, I returned to the seance room to retrieve my equipment. On the table, something that hadn't been there before, a shard of broken mirror, and carved into it, in a trembling script, were the words, "Don't let them find you." I left the Winchester house with more questions than answers. Most of my photos were blurred, the voice recording erased. But since that night, I've never quite felt alone. In quiet moments, I hear footsteps behind me, and the low, indistinct murmur of whispers from inside the walls. They say Sarah built the house to hide from the spirits, but I think she failed. And now they're watching someone else. Part 4, Screaming in the Dark, LaLaurie Mansion. Setting, French Quarter, New Orleans, LaLaurie Mansion. I arrived in New Orleans at the start of October, just as the city began buzzing with Halloween festivities. As a documentary filmmaker who focuses on America's darkest historical corners, one place had always remained on my blacklist, LaLaurie Mansion. A place cloaked in dread, forever tied to one of the most brutal figures in the South's past, Madame Delphine LaLaurie. I never believed in rumors. I believed in historical records, documents, things you could capture with a lens. But after one night in that house, I began to doubt everything I thought was real. I had permission to film inside the mansion as part of a special project. Though no one lives there now, the house remains privately owned, and very few are ever allowed inside. That night, I was accompanied by my assistant cameraman and the local guide. From the moment I stepped through the front door, the air changed. Heavy, thick, like I'd stepped underwater. The ceilings were high, chandeliers intact, blackwood floors pristine. Beautiful in a way that felt wrong, like time had stopped here in the 1800s and never started again. Our guide began recounting the legends, how Madame LaLaurie tortured enslaved people in the attic, how a fire in 1834 revealed scenes so horrifying that even the city's seasoned firemen were shaken, bodies shackled, eyes sewn shut, tongues removed. Then she disappeared, leaving behind a house some claimed was the devil's cage. I filmed every room, but when we reached the third floor, the so-called torture attic, our equipment began to malfunction. The image blurred, the audio warped. I thought maybe it was just old gear acting up, until something strange happened. We heard dragging, chains scraping along wood. Slow, deliberate, from the room at the end of the hall. No one else was in the house. We froze. Then came another sound, a scream. Not modern. It was raw, dry, a voice shredded by agony centuries old. I ran to the last room. The door was locked. I pressed my ear to the wood inside. I heard moaning, unintelligible whispers, pleading. My assistant turned pale. "I'm not staying here," he said quietly. We rushed downstairs. As we reached the staircase, the lights went out. In the darkness, I heard footsteps sprinting behind us. I turned, no one. Then, a scream rang out, right by my ear, so loud I felt my eardrum vibrate. When the lights flicked back on, all three of us were still standing close together. No one had moved. It had to be our imagination until we saw the marks. At the bottom of the stairs, gouged into the wood, were 6 fresh scratches, deep and parallel, as if carved by fingernails. Despite everything, I was determined to finish the shoot. At midnight, I left a fixed camera running in the attic. I went downstairs to rest while it recorded. Around 2 a.m., I saw the door to the second floor slowly swing open. There was no breeze, no one nearby. I moved to close it when I heard a hiss. Soft, lingering. I pointed my flashlight into the darkness. Something stood at the end of the hallway. A figure, tall, thin, hunched, with tangled hair. I yelled. The flashlight flickered, and the shape was gone. The next morning, I reviewed the attic footage. At 2:16 a.m., a shadow slid across the frame. It didn't walk. It glided weightless. Then a distant scream echoed, followed by a whisper in French. "ILS any dormant jamais. They never sleep." I sent the recording to an audio expert. He said the voice wasn't human, or at least not alive. The frequency carried distortions he claimed could only occur in very old recordings, or something not bound to a natural source. I never returned to LaLaurie Mansion, but I realized something that night. Some pain is so deep, even time cannot erase it. It doesn't fade. It remains in the walls, the floors, the bricks. If you ever walk past Royal Street at night and hear screaming from behind the sealed windows of a tall, elegant house, keep walking. Don't stop. Don't look up at the third floor window, because someone might be looking back, and they do not forget. Part 5, Ghosts Behind the Windows, Jackson Square. Setting, Jackson Square, French Quarter, New Orleans. I returned to New Orleans for the second time on a damp October evening. The city was alive as always, jazz music drifting from every corner, the scent of beignet and café au lait hanging in the air, cobblestone streets leading to stories, both magical and macabre. My previous visit had brought me to the infamous LaLaurie Mansion, and though I came back with rich footage, I also carried a lingering unease. This time, I decided to stay near Jackson Square, the heart of the French Quarter, bordered by the historic St. Louis Cathedral, old Spanish-style buildings, and countless whispered tales of ghosts wandering in the night. I rented a small room on the 3rd floor of a building facing the square. The top floor had an iron-rod balcony overlooking the cathedral's facade. The landlady, an elderly woman with silver-white hair, left me with just one warning before disappearing down the stairs. Keep the 3rd floor windows shut at night. Don't open them, no matter what you hear. I thought it was just superstition, but the first night made me question that assumption. Around 1 a.m., I was setting up my camera to film nighttime footage of Jackson Square. Below, the square was nearly deserted. Suddenly, I noticed someone standing beneath a lamppost, a man in a 19th century coat and a tall hat. He stared directly up at me, motionless, unblinking. I raised my camera to capture the figure, but in the viewfinder, he was gone. I looked away from the camera. He was still there. No footsteps, no breathing, just stillness. I backed into the room and shut the balcony door. Seconds later, I heard it 3 knocks. Clear, deliberate. I didn't open it. I couldn't. The next morning, I asked locals about the square's ghost stories. One street artist nearby told me that many had seen figures reflected in the windows of the old buildings, even when no one was inside. Especially the house, he said, pointing to my building. Number 619. It used to be a temporary holding cell back in the Spanish era. One of the prisoners hanged himself in the attic. I froze. 619 was the house I was staying in. On the second night, I stayed up late editing footage. Around 3 a.m., I heard footsteps above me. Something impossible, as I was on the top floor. Heavy, dragging footsteps, ending directly above my bed. I grabbed my camera and went to the attic stairwell. The door was locked tight, the lock rusted, clearly untouched for years, but with my ear pressed to the wood. I heard it, whispering, multiple voices overlapping, frantic, angry, and then complete silence. I returned to my room and found the balcony door slightly ajar. I had locked it. I was sure of it. A cold breeze drifted in, carrying the scent of old wood smoke and rusted iron. I shut the door and drew the curtain. In the mirror across the room, I saw it, a figure standing behind me, staring. I spun around. Nothing, but the chill in the air clung to me like a hand that refused to let go. The next morning, I planned to leave, but something made me pause. A handwritten note slid under my door. No stamp, no name. Just one sentence. If you leave now, you'll take them with you. I shivered. This wasn't my imagination. My camera had captured footage of the curtain opening on its own, and a white blur gliding across the frame. Tall, faint, humanoid. That final night, I stayed awake until dawn. At around 4 a.m., I stepped out onto the balcony, ignoring the old woman's warning. The square below was silent. The yellow lamplight flickered in the mist. Then I saw them. In the windows of the building across the square, figures, watching me. Not one, but many. Some old, some young. All lifeless. Their eyes were wide, vacant, fixed directly on me. I lifted my camera, and the screen went black. No sound. No image. I lowered it. The windows were empty again. I packed before the sun rose and left immediately. As I turned the corner away from Jackson Square, I looked back one last time. On the third-floor balcony where I'd stood hours earlier, a figure stood in my place, dressed in black, faceless, just a shadow with form. I've never returned to New Orleans since, and whenever someone asks me about Jackson Square, I only say this. If you walk by it late at night, don't look into the windows. They reflect more than just your image. They show you what you were never meant to see. Part 6. Ghosts in the White House. The Footsteps of President Lincoln. I never thought I'd one day walk inside the White House, a place where power and history intertwine with every stone, every hallway, every old room. But this visit wasn't just for another documentary project. I had been invited to join a special after-hours survey conducted by a team of historians and paranormal researchers. Their unofficial purpose: to investigate the numerous unexplained events said to have occurred within the walls of America's most iconic residence. Sounds absurd? Perhaps. But for over a century, people have whispered stories. Presidents, first ladies, security guards, and visitors alike, all claiming to have experienced things they couldn't explain. And one name comes up more than any other: Abraham Lincoln. I arrived at the White House on a freezing winter night, with Washington, D.C. wrapped in fog and dim golden streetlights flickering against the cold. After security clearance, I was escorted to the second floor, to the Lincoln bedroom, a chamber preserved to look almost exactly as it did in the 19th century, complete with a massive carved bed and fading portraits on the walls. If there's anywhere in the White House where you might feel him, the elderly historian guiding me said, it's here. I didn't believe in ghosts, at least, not until that night. But as soon as I stepped into the room, a strange chill ran down my spine. Not the chill of winter, but something internal, the sensation of being watched. I placed my camera near the window and began scribbling notes. The clock neared midnight. In the hallway beyond, the dim lights cast long shadows along the white walls. I didn't hear footsteps, but I did hear breathing, soft, shallow breaths, as if someone were standing just behind the curtain. I approached it slowly and pulled it aside. No one, but on the fogged-up window pane, I saw a handprint, large and clear, like someone had just pressed their palm against the glass. I brought the camera closer, but the screen showed nothing. I wiped the glass, scanned the room again, then returned to sit on the edge of the bed. That's when I heard footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate, echoing down the hallway. I assumed it was someone from the team, but when I opened the door, the corridor was empty. I turned back and froze. The chair at the writing desk, previously empty, was now occupied. A tall figure, draped in black, wearing a stovepipe hat, sat silently, his back to me. The figure didn't move, didn't turn around, just sat there motionless. The air in the room thickened. Suddenly, the chair swiveled slightly, and the figure was gone. I rushed to check every corner. Nothing. A strange scent lingered in the air, burnt wood, gunpowder, and aged paper, like a battlefield, frozen in time. I played back the camera footage. The image was scrambled, but the audio remained. A soft creak of the chair turning and a low, steady breathing. Sleep was impossible after that. Just before dawn, I left the bedroom and wandered the halls. As I passed the west wing, I caught a glimpse of something in the reflective glass of a wooden door. A tall silhouette standing inside the Oval Office. I turned. The room was locked. Weeks later, I shared my story with a retired White House security officer. He just nodded quietly. "You are the 20th person I know who's seen Lincoln in there. He doesn't leave. Not when the country's in trouble." I asked, "Why does he appear during troubled times?" He replied, "Because he still worries for America." During World War II, Roosevelt claimed to have seen Lincoln standing by the fireplace. Eleanor Roosevelt heard footsteps passing the Lincoln bedroom at night. After Kennedy was assassinated, someone saw his shadow on the east staircase. Maybe it's all collective imagination. Maybe it's the weight of history playing tricks on our minds. But when I left the White House that morning, I knew one thing for sure. Something remains. Something that watches, that lingers, that silently walks the corridors of power, long after the presidents themselves have left. So if you ever visit the White House, listen carefully when night falls. And if you hear slow, steady footsteps behind you, don't be afraid. It may just be an old president still doing his duty. Part 7. Manson Ghosts. The Souls That Cannot Rest. I used to believe I was immune to ghost stories. As a documentary writer, I had spent nights in historic hotels, abandoned chapels, even deep inside European catacombs. But I'll never forget that night in California, a place once known as Spahn Ranch, the infamous base of one of America's darkest legends, the Manson family. Today, the land is mostly barren, just a few rotting posts and scattered stones across a dry, wind-blown valley. The trees seem wilted, and the wind whispers through like a language of the dead. I arrived with 2 friends, both fellow researchers, hoping only to film some footage for a history project. But what we brought back was more than just images. Before the sun set, an old man who lived nearby approached us. He stared at us like he'd known us in another lifetime and said slowly, "If you hear someone crying, don't answer. If you see someone wandering the woods, don't follow. And if someone calls your name but you can't see them, leave immediately." We laughed it off, thinking it was just local folklore meant to spook outsiders. But by midnight, with silence draped over the land like a blanket, his warning was all I could think about. We were sitting around a small campfire when I suddenly felt watched, so intensely that I stood up and swept my flashlight through the darkness. No one, but when I turned around, I saw fresh footprints, still wet, as if someone had just stepped out of water. Yet there were no streams or ponds here, only dry dirt and scattered gravel. One of my friends, Rachel, suddenly winced in pain. She said her head throbbed and she could hear murmuring beneath her feet. We assumed it was altitude sickness or fatigue. But then she froze, eyes locked on something in midair. "Don't you hear it?" she whispered. "Someone crying." I listened. At first, it was just wind, but then faint, and from somewhere deep in the trees, I heard it too. A woman sobbing. The sound had no clear direction. It echoed as though it came from everywhere at once. We all stood up, flashlights sweeping wildly. Rachel walked off first, like she was being pulled. We called her name, no response. When we caught up, she was standing in front of a large mossy rock, an old landmark where Charles Manson and his followers once gathered. Suddenly, our flashlights began to flicker, then went dead. In the darkness, I felt a freezing hand on my shoulder. I spun around, nothing. But in the trees ahead, just beyond the edge of our light, stood a shadowy figure, facing away from us, motionless, silent. We pulled Rachel back to the campfire, but she seemed dazed, murmuring nonsense. As we relit the fire, the flames cast strange shadows across her face, and for a split second, I saw another face overlaying hers, a young woman with hollow eyes, staring through the firelight. That night, sleep was impossible. Strange sounds, branches snapping, footsteps circling our camp, kept returning. Every time we flashed our lights, the forest returned to silence. Near dawn, Rachel finally seemed to come back to herself. She had no memory of wandering off, no recollection of the crying or the moss-covered rock. But when we checked our camera footage and audio recordings, something froze the blood in our veins. In the video where Rachel had walked toward the stone, no one else appeared. No crying, no shadowy figure, nothing unusual. But on the audio recorder, at that exact moment, we heard a whisper right next to the microphone. "Don't leave. Stay with us." It wasn't Rachel's voice. It wasn't mine or our third friend's. It was a female voice, raspy, desperate, and empty. We left just after sunrise, in silence. None of us spoke during the drive back. In the following weeks, Rachel began having recurring dreams, walking through the forest, always heading towards something she couldn't quite see. And in every dream, someone was calling her name. As for me, I still have that recording. I've tried deleting it. It always comes back, and each time I listen, that voice grows clearer. Part 8. The Black Haunting of the Bridge St. Augustine. St. Augustine's Bridge, with its ancient stone arches stretching over the waters of the Matanzas River, stood as a silent testament to centuries of history. The bridge, one of the oldest in the United States, had seen the ebb and flow of time, from Spanish conquistadors to the battles of the American Revolution. Yet, with its age came rumors. Whispers among the locals spoke of strange occurrences, eerie voices, and flickering lights in the darkness. Those who had dared to cross it after nightfall often claimed to have felt the unmistakable chill of death itself. I had heard the stories, of course, but, like many others, I was skeptical. I'd grown up with tales of haunted places, only to realize that most of them were just that, tales. But something about St. Augustine's Bridge intrigued me, and when I found myself in Florida on a solo trip, I decided it was time to see it for myself. The day I arrived was warm, typical for a summer afternoon. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that seemed to creep across the bridge. I could feel the weight of history in the air, as though the stones beneath my feet held the memories of countless souls that had crossed before me. As I walked along the bridge, the low hum of traffic and the occasional cry of seagulls overhead gave way to an eerie stillness. I had heard that the bridge was notorious for being haunted, particularly by the spirits of prisoners who had been executed here long ago. It was said that their souls could not rest, bound forever to the site of their deaths. But it wasn't just the condemned souls that were rumored to haunt the bridge. Some stories spoke of soldiers from the American Revolution, their restless spirits still wandering in search of something they could never find. The setting sun cast an orange glow on the horizon as I made my way to the center of the bridge. I paused for a moment, looking out over the river, where the water reflected the fading light like liquid silver. I was lost in the moment, until a sudden, sharp sound broke the silence. It was a voice, a whisper, barely audible, but unmistakable. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. "Get off the bridge." I whipped around, expecting to find someone behind me, but there was no one. The bridge was empty, save for a few distant cars passing by. I told myself it was just the wind, or my imagination playing tricks on me, but deep down, I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. I continued walking, but the air around me felt heavier now. It was as though the very atmosphere had thickened. pressing down on me with an unnatural weight. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the bridge was now bathed in the cool, pale light of the moon. That's when I heard it again, a soft, almost indistinguishable murmur. I couldn't make out the words, but the voice seemed to be coming from the shadows, just beyond the range of my flashlight. "Help me." I stopped dead in my tracks, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. The voice was faint, but it was definitely there. It sounded desperate, as if someone was pleading for assistance. But who could it be? I was alone on the bridge, and I had seen no one since arriving. I turned around slowly, scanning the area. The darkness seemed to stretch endlessly ahead, and the old stone arches loomed like silent sentinels. A cold wind swept through, and I caught a faint glimpse of movement just at the edge of my vision. I snapped my head toward it, but there was nothing. Just the bridge, the river, and the night. A sudden crash of footsteps echoed from behind me. I spun around again, heart pounding in my chest. This time, I wasn't imagining it. The sounds were real. Someone, or something, was walking behind me. I could hear the unmistakable shuffle of feet on stone, slow but deliberate. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. The footsteps halted, and for a moment, everything was silent. Then, as though in response, I heard the voice again, this time much clearer. "Turn around." The words echoed in my mind, filling me with a cold dread that I couldn't shake. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. Slowly I turned. There, standing at the far end of the bridge, was a figure. At first, it seemed like a man, dressed in old-fashioned clothing, clothes from a time-long past. His face was obscured by the shadows, but his presence was undeniable. I could feel his eyes on me, even though I couldn't see them. The air around him seemed to shimmer with a strange, unnatural energy. I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, my body refusing to obey my mind's commands. The figure took a step forward, and I heard the unmistakable creak of old leather boots on the stone. Another step, and then another. With each movement, the air grew colder, and the sense of dread deepened. "Do you hear them?" the figure whispered, his voice low and gravelly. I tried to speak, to ask who he was, but my voice caught in my throat. The figure's lips curled into a faint, sinister smile. He raised a hand, pointing directly at me. "Do you know who I am?" I wanted to scream, but the words never came. The figure began to move closer, the sound of his footsteps growing louder with each passing second. My heart raced, and I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. In that moment, I realized I was not alone on the bridge. The spirits of the past, those prisoners, those soldiers, were still there, trapped in a place where they had suffered, where they had died. With a surge of adrenaline, I spun around and ran, my legs moving faster than I thought possible. The footsteps followed, echoing in the darkness, growing closer, closer. The cold wind whipped past me, but I couldn't stop. I had to get off the bridge. Finally, I reached the end, my breath ragged in my chest. I glanced over my shoulder one last time, expecting to see the figure right behind me. But when I looked, there was nothing. The bridge was empty once more, silent, as though nothing had ever happened. I left St. Augustine's Bridge that night, but I knew I would never forget it. I had felt the presence of those who had died there, and I knew that, for some of them, the bridge would always be their home forever. Part 9. The Crying in the Cemetery of the Wandering Ghosts. The Museum of the American Indian, located in the heart of Manhattan, New York, is one of the most significant historical museums in the United States, housing a valuable collection of artifacts related to the culture and history of Native American tribes. However, it is not only famous for its unique collections, but also for the eerie stories of the spirits of Native Americans, especially during the night. This museum was once the site of the former U.S. Custom House, built in the late 19th century before being transformed into a museum in the 1920s. The location holds a long and complex history, closely tied to the Native American people. While the museum preserves countless artifacts, the stories of ghosts from the past add an element of mystery to the place. One of the most prominent ghost stories at the museum involves the spirits of Native Americans who died during a dark period when their lands and cultures were taken away. On dark nights, when the dim lights illuminate the empty galleries, some museum staff have reported feeling a strange presence. Unexplained footsteps, whispers like voices calling from far away, are phenomena that many have witnessed. One museum employee recalls an experience when he was walking through the galleries one evening. He suddenly felt a cold breeze and heard strange footsteps behind him. When he turned around, no one was there. Suddenly, a heavy feeling overcame him, as if someone was watching him from behind the Native American skulls and jewelry. This feeling of fear is not uncommon among the staff. Some believe that the spirits of the Native Americans still walk through the museum, as if they cannot leave behind their heritage and culture. There are also stories of visitors encountering the spirits of Native Americans during their tours at the museum in the evening. One group of tourists recounted a strange experience when they entered a large gallery late in the afternoon. They felt the atmosphere become heavy, and suddenly, a strange light illuminated a corner of the room. As they approached, they clearly sensed the presence of a ghost, a blurry figure dressed in traditional Native American attire. The figure disappeared quickly, but the eerie and strange feeling remained in the air. In addition to these invisible occurrences, museum staff have also noticed strange incidents involving the artifacts. Sometimes, objects appear to move or shift positions without anyone touching them. Some paintings on the walls occasionally tilt forward for no apparent reason, or Native American masks unexpectedly fall from their shelves. These strange events have led many to believe that the spirits of the Native Americans exist not only in memories, but also in the very artifacts they left behind. Another employee shared that one evening after hours, she felt a cold hand touch her shoulder in the gallery. The sensation was truly terrifying, and when she turned around, no one was there. What's remarkable is that she was not the only one to experience this. Several others have had similar encounters, making the ghost stories of Native Americans hard to ignore. One of the most famous stories involves the spirit of a Native American man who reportedly died during the land conflicts. This man was severely wounded and later died in the final days of the conflict. Museum staff have shared that they often see a figure gliding through the hallways at night. Some say the figure is faint, but the features of the Native American attire are still visible. There are even reports of hearing sighs or whispers from afar. Some visitors have tried taking photos of the galleries, and their pictures often contain strange phenomena. Some photos show shadows seemingly moving through the rooms, even though no one was nearby. Other photos appear blurry, or strange lights appear, leading many to believe it's a sign of the spirit's presence. The stories of hauntings at the Museum of the American Indian not only make it a fascinating destination for those interested in Native American history and culture, but also a spot that attracts those in search of supernatural experiences. Whether these spirits truly exist or not, the eerie atmosphere and mysterious nature of the museum continue to captivate curiosity and fuel ghost stories. If you ever find yourself in New York and visit this museum, don't be surprised if you feel like someone is watching you in the darkness. The spirits of Native Americans may still be present in the ancient galleries, guarding the memory of a lost culture. And if you hear whispers or feel an inexplicable chill, don't panic. Those may be the spirits trying to remind you of a forgotten past.